Hello everyone, I'm forecaster Jack Sillin here with the tropical weather discussion video for Monday, July 27th, 2020. It's been an active week in the tropical Atlantic. We saw Tropical Storm Gonzalo form over the southern main development region down here off the South American coastline. Then we saw Tropical Storm and eventually Hurricane Hannah develop in the Gulf of Mexico. Both of those systems have since dissipated and are no longer a threat to the U.S. and will remain that way going forward. This is the next system to watch, dubbed 92L by the Hurricane Center. It's drifting west out in the middle of the tropical Atlantic off to the east of the Windward Islands. Currently, it does not have much convective activity that's very impressive. You can see just sort of disorganized, relatively weak convective activity here, but it has plenty of spin to it, a good upper level outflow off to the north and off to the south. So we definitely have to watch this one for development over the next few days as it tracks off to the west-northwest. It's going to have a hard time if it. So basically, I talked in the blog yesterday and the blog the day before, and it might be easiest to just go and take a look at that post. We basically have two possibilities for the storm as it approaches the Lesser Antilles. Possibility number one is that it strengthens relatively slowly. It remains weak. It doesn't really get its convective activity up to snuff. And it just sort of drifts off into the Eastern Caribbean. Maybe it interacts with Hispaniola or Cuba, but it really falls apart, or rather fails to get going. And in that case, that we don't really have to worry about this for at least another week to 10 days. Maybe if it's able to move into the Western Caribbean and then sit and fester for a little while and then find a favorable environment, then maybe we could take another look at it. But really, that southern option would not be favorable for impacts to the U.S. The other option is that this is able to develop into a coherent tropical cyclone. It doesn't need to be particularly intense. Really, only a tropical storm would do it, approaching the islands. And in that case, it would track farther north. It would miss out on the unfavorable conditions over the Caribbean. It would also generally tend to miss out on interaction with the Greater Antilles, which is prohibitive for tropical cyclone development. And this is really the path that would be more favorable for impacts to the U.S. So after the rest of the discussion, basically regarding 92L is presuming or assuming, for the sake of argument, that it will follow this northern track, because if it follows the southern track, there's not really much else to talk about. That's not to say that I think that the northern track is more likely. In fact, based on trends today with this, the sort of lack of convective activity associated with the system, I'm starting to lean more towards that southern track, and most model guidance is tending in that direction as well. But just for the sake of argument, we'll assume that this makes it through the Windward Islands as a relatively strong or at least consolidated system. And if it does that, it's going to encounter this region of unfavorable conditions near the southern Bahamas, southwestern Atlantic. And this is associated with this potential vorticity streamer, which you can see here. It's this sort of lighter orangey red thing that extends all the way from the North Atlantic down towards Bermuda into the Carolinas, and then all the way back into the Gulf of Mexico. So this is a little bit of extratropical air. You can see it, well, it's probably too late for this loop anyway, but this originated as a trough of low pressure over Canada several days ago. You can see there's this sort of loopy thing that almost looks like an ocean wave breaking. This is called an anticyclonic wave breaking event. It's responsible for the hot weather up in New England today. But really, the upshot for 92L is that it's pushing this potential vorticity streamer, this area of higher potential vorticity air, or low or higher theta values here, I guess, or this is a pressure surface. So higher dynamic tropopause pressures, which basically means the tropopause is found lower in the atmosphere. It's very confusing for those who don't have a background in meteorology. So I guess I should skip the detailed explanation of what exactly this is as a physical quantity and just say that this is extratropical energy, I guess. It's not technically energy, but you can think of it as air with extratropical characteristics. That's probably a better way of saying it. Air with extratropical characteristics. So that's dry air, plenty of wind shear. It's basically making a little vacation down into the tropics where it will encounter 92L as it moves north of the Antilles, assuming that that's what it does. So as that process happens, the shear will tend to increase over the system. By Friday, say, is about the time that we're thinking that this is going to move north of Puerto Rico. So by Friday, the system's going to be interacting with this PV streamer. And how that interaction goes is going to really determine whether this is drifting through the Bahamas as a hurricane or drifting through the Bahamas as a tropical depression or perhaps even tropical wave. So currently, the prevailing thought among model guidance, especially the Euro, is that this sort of zone of extreme southwesterly wind shear in excess of 65 knots is going to rip this thing to shreds, and we basically have nothing to worry about from 92L. It's important to note that if the storm were to approach the northern Antilles here as a stronger tropical storm, it could actually bust a hole for itself, basically push this PV streamer aside through diabatic outflow processes, which is basically, remember we said this PV streamer is air that has extratropical characteristics, meaning it's cooler and drier. Well, if you take a tropical cyclone that's relatively strong, that's basically constantly exhausting out the top very warm, very moist air, then you can push that cold, dry air off to the side and find yourself an environment that's more favorable for strengthening. Basically, the ability of 92L to fend off this PV streamer is largely a function of how strong it is in the near term, medium term. And again, convective trends today don't really seem to be shouting loudly in favor of a strong 92L. So we'll see what happens with that. But basically, even if the ECMWF model is correct, this thing falls apart over Hispaniola. It gets shredded by this PV streamer. It otherwise fails to organize. We're still not quite out of the woods, because you can see that by Sunday morning, the ECMWF has a strong tropical disturbance with plenty of spin over the southern Gulf of Mexico. And anytime you have that happen with waters as warm as they are now, you need to be concerned about the potential for tropical cyclone development. So even if 92L fails to develop out here, even if it gets shredded over Hispaniola or north of Hispaniola by this PV streamer, that's not to say that there's no threat from the system. It just might end up developing next weekend over the Gulf of Mexico rather than this week over the tropical Atlantic. So then, of course, we have a whole variety of other questions to talk about. But really, I don't see this as being a huge threat to the U.S. at the moment, based on how things are looking. And even if it were to threaten the U.S., it wouldn't be for at least 7 days, 6 to 7 days. So really nothing imminent to worry about there. Looking closer to home, in the interim period, we're looking pretty quiet. There was at some point an indication that this system southeast of North Carolina might try to develop into a tropical depression or storm, but it too is failing to pop off much in the way of convection, so not really worried about that. And then you can see that there's really nothing in the way of tropical disturbances before we get around to 92L approaching southern Florida or the southern Gulf of Mexico next weekend. So lots of questions still to be resolved with 92L. Not expecting any clear answers, at least within the next several days. Of course, I'll have plenty of blog posts explaining every detail of this systems forecast as we move through the next few days. What's after 92L? Well, there's a strong tropical wave emerging off of Africa right now that we can see by panning over here. Remember, you can click near the edge of the satellite maps to sort of pan over here. And I think, yeah, all right, here it is. So this feature is looking pretty good on satellite imagery right now. It has basically zero support from ensembles or model guidance. You can see it here. It shows up relatively well on ECMWF forecasts in the short term, but then as we move into the medium term, there's sort of part of it that gets shoved off to the west, part of it that sticks around here in this broad monsoon trough, and then nothing seems to really come of this. That may or may not change. I could see this system end up moving west a little bit better organized, or you see these, these little wriggles here. That little area of spin there, that little area of spin there. This is basically how we got Tropical Storm Gonzalo. It's how we've gotten other tropical storms in the past, where these waves emerge. They don't really do anything. They sit and fester here, southeast of Barbados, and then you get one of these little clusters to pop off enough convection to form a tropical cyclone. So could that happen next weekend while we're watching 92L over here? Yeah, I think it could. But I don't think it's particularly likely, and even if that were to happen, then we'd start the roughly 7-day countdown clock towards potential U.S. impacts a week from now. So certainly nothing to worry about in the short term. So all that to say, I think that the U.S. is pretty clear from tropical threats for at least the next 5 to 7 days. We'll be watching 92L during that time to see if it develops into anything of concern. And then after that, we'll continue to keep an eye on these waves emerging off of Africa. If we just look quickly at ensemble guidance, you can see that most EPS guidance is suggesting that 92L will fade out over Hispaniola or the southern Bahamas or the Eastern Caribbean. A few rogue members take this and try to recurve a hurricane off the East Coast or bring it close enough for some impacts. But so long as we only see 2 EPS members projecting that sort of outcome, I'm definitely not too worried about it. Then the next several waves have limited ensemble support, so overall, not super concerned about what I'm seeing here for the next couple weeks. As always, we'll end this video with a little bit of a look into the longer term. This, of course, is our upward motion, downward motion map, with the current time being at the top and then the forecast moving out in time as you head down this graphic. Our burst of upward motion that's been supporting the recent flurry of tropical cyclone activity over the Atlantic looks to be moving off into Africa to begin August. That would tend to favor a gradual reduction in Atlantic tropical cyclone potential as this suppressed phase of the Kelvin wave moves in. I don't think that necessarily prohibits development, but I think that we should see activity certainly slow down a bit as we head into early to mid-August. What happens after that is largely a function of how much this Indian Ocean African standing wave here, notice it's standing wave because it's not moving east or west over the course of the next 2 weeks, how that evolves, and whether we get another Kelvin wave to emerge out of that and then traverse east towards the Atlantic basin. But remember, it's still extremely early in the season. We typically don't even start thinking about African waves until mid to late August, so just the fact that we're having any of this discussion in July is pretty absurd. We should be all quiet right now and for at least the next 2 to 3 weeks. Climatologically speaking anyway. So there's plenty of hurricane season still left to go. Remember, the climatological peak of the season isn't until September 10th, so we may get a lull here in early to mid-August, but that's certainly no reason to be complacent for what could come as we head into later August and then the beginning of September. All right, that's it for me for now. I'll continue to have blog posts explaining 92L, that wave after it, any other tropical system that might threaten the U.S., and then I'll be back here next week with another tropical weather discussion video as per usual every Monday. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great week.